not long after we finished recording the last episode, I thought of this idea for a cold open for this episode, and it has to do with this ad, and I sent it to you. Do you remember it?
Yes, I do.
The thing about talking about this ad is that it's very visual, right? I mean, it's hard to explain it without having the visual aid in front of you. So we encourage anyone listening to this to go and seek this out. You know, pause the podcast episode, go and find it, come on back. But basically, we've got this ad that was kind of dropped. I actually don't know the provenance of it. I heard one version of this where it was like a concept ad that had been drafted for the company in question, and it never actually made it to their social media accounts or to TV or wherever they ended up putting it. And then I heard a version of the story where it is actually 100% a real ad, and they posted it like unironically. So the ad is basically like we're following the arc of a boy's life, a man's life. And we start when he's an infant, and we see this basically like
even before that.
Yeah, does it actually go like into the womb?
Yeah, that's how it starts. Right?
Oh, okay, yeah, I forgot. So basically, like, picture the like a poor man's riff on Terrence Malick, essentially, where you've got the arc of this boy's life, you know, going through all of these postcard moments of, you know, growing up, getting to know his family, you know, having his first kiss, swimming with a girlfriend in a pool while it rains, losing the girl to another guy, getting really like going into an angry goth phase, shaving his head, running away to Asia, like doing his first big trip around the world. And then it all whooshes back, and you see the kid. He's now like a young man, and he's in line for, drum roll please, Subway.
The biggest plot twist of the century.
Oh boy. And you know, the experience is best left for, you know, if you came across this thing and you basically play a game where you try to guess what the brand is before they actually show the logo right at the end. But it is just, it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen.
It's ridiculous because it's so very well done.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of like pure technical capability, and the, you know, cinematography is fine. You know, it looks like a trailer for some sort of coming of age movie.
It really felt like an angsty teenage music video. And then at the end, it's just like, welcome to Subway. And at the end, you're just like, I don't understand how a sandwich has anything to do with all of this other than the fact that the sequence itself was very well done. So I'm not exactly sure, like, in the brainstorming part of the commercial, like what exactly like transpired. Like, did they come up with an idea and it just kind of like snowballed into something else? Or I don't exactly understand what the message is.
No, I mean, like, on the face value of it, it's almost like Subway is saying, you know, your entire life is preparation for the moment where you choose your sandwich when you get to the front of that line.
Something like that. Or like all things in childhood and babyhood culminate in a visit to a Subway.
Yeah, like, you know, you go through all those formative experiences just to decide whether you want Italian herbs and cheese or just white bread.
Two worst ones. I remember at Carlton, like Subway was one of the few things that was just like ubiquitous. Like it's on like every street corner in Canada. The funniest thing though is when I was living in Ottawa, I lived pretty close to Parliament Hill, and that town is like a very white collar government city. So I remember coming back from class, and it was late enough. It was like 6 or 7 at night, and I was like, you know what? I'm tired. I'm just gonna grab Subway and I'm just gonna go home. So I go to the nearest one close to me on Parliament Hill, and it was closed. Like everything in that area closes at like 5 or 6, and I'm just like,
welcome to Ottawa.
Yeah, like what kind of bullshit is this?
So what you're saying is, you know, there's a version of that ad out there to be made where, you know, we see your life playing in this like elaborate flashback, and then you get to the doors of the Subway and it's closed, and then you just like walk away like Charlie Brown style, you know?
No. We need to get moving.
Hello, welcome back to the Extra Buttery Podcast. This is episode 53, our 13th episode of 2019. This time on the show, we've got a couple of movies and a TV show that almost feels like a movie in and of itself. We're going to be talking about Spider-Man Far From Home, the new Marvel movie, and then jumping over into a completely different genre with the psychological thriller / horror, a Midsommar from Ari Aster. And then it'll be into something also kind of horrific, Stranger Things 3, the new season on Netflix. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow, and joining me from Vancouver is my co-host, Jason Chen. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good.
I thought we talked about getting rid of the greeting because we always say the same things. Did you see Homecoming?
I did.
No, sorry, not Homecoming. Far From Home.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I saw Far From Home. I think it was I think you saw it first and then I saw it a couple of days later.
So the crowd I went into was obviously like a whole throng of Marvel fans. It was a little... The audience definitely skewed younger than the Avengers films, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, is that just because, do you think, Spider-Man is a character who maybe has a bit of a younger audience? He's a younger character, like, chronologically speaking.
Yeah, I think so. I think for that demographic, 13 to 18 demographic, I feel like Tom Holland has more pull than, Chris Evans or Robert Downey Jr.
Right.
Which is fine because overall the experience I think made it better.
This is Mr. Beck.
We could have used someone like you on my world.
Your world? Beck is from Earth, just not ours. The snap tore a hole in our dimension.
You're saying there's a multiverse?
We have a job to do, and you're coming with us.
It takes place after Avengers Endgame and Tony Stark is dead and this whole world is still reeling. And Peter Parker resumes his life as a high school kid. And basically, the way Marvel has done it is that this 5-year absence where in between the snaps is called the blip. And I think this is a really convenient way for Marvel to just jump back right in where they left off. So how they do it is they basically just say, all right, the past 5 years didn't happen. And everyone that came back from the snap, hey, this is basically day number whatever it is. And so that 5-year gap just kind of like, whoop. Gone.
Except there's people who have aged up by 5 years in the intervening time, and so you've got cases where characters in Peter Parker's class are now paired up with kids who were 5 years younger than them when they disappeared.
Yeah, which is kind of weird because it I swear it screws up a government census or some sort of population age group shift.
Oh yeah, and not only that, can I just point out that the way they handle it in this basically school news video off the top of the movie introduces so many existential questions for me. I'm basically in a Pixar Cars existential spiral right now because we see footage of a band performance in a school gym and there's footage of the kids blipping out of existence and then blipping back.
Yep.
And so that implies that if everyone who disappeared popped back into existence in the exact same spot they were when they left, then what about all the people who are flying in planes or driving in cars? Do they just pop back into existence and are
in midair
for 30,000 feet in the air and then they just die? Because that's really dark. And I know that Marvel would never be able to address that, but the implication is nutty.
Yeah. Imagine, Rob, though, you disappear for 5 years and you come back and suddenly your younger brother's older than you. You're just what?
Yeah.
This doesn't work anymore. The family tree's all messed up now.
Yeah, and at least one person online pointed out that imagine if the people disappeared in the act of doing something maybe embarrassing, I don't know, having sex or something, and then they kind of pop back into the bedroom that they were in when they disappeared, and there's maybe different people living there now.
Well, having sex isn't embarrassing, but getting caught doing it is kind of
yes,
funny.
That's what I mean. Of course. Not body shaming or any kind of Puritan stuff here, but it's just the list of possible directions for that to go is kind of hilarious to me.
But anyway, so Peter Parker comes back and he's kind of burdened by this whole Avengers thing. Tony Stark gives him his new suit, gives him everything he has basically, and now he's feeling the pressure. So this time in school, they're going on a Euro trip, and he's super excited to leave everything behind. And of course, he goes to Europe and trouble follows him. And we're there. That's when we're introduced to Quentin Beck, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, whose nickname is Mysterio. And he's this sort of like special effects genius. And basically, he helps out Spider-Man. There's a conflict. There's a couple twists in there. And so at the end of the day, Spider-Man is again forced to become Spider-Man, even though he's not in New York, and saved everyone from these CGI monsters called elementals that are, as the movie explains, from this alternate Earth reality that have come to Peter Parker's Earth to destroy everything. And Nick Fury is involved, and all his high school buddies are there to help him out as well. Overall, I thought the film was quite good. It didn't have the stakes that Avengers did because it didn't have a build up to that point. What I did find kind of interesting, well, maybe not so interesting, is that Peter Parker goes through the same sort of like adolescent responsibility versus fun kind of balancing act that he has to do. And I didn't find it that interesting this time around. I don't know about you, but it just feels like every conflict we've had, every internal and external conflict that Peter Parker has ever had, I feel like we've seen it before.
Yeah, I mean, you compare it against the last like really good sequel in the Spider-Man franchise, Spider-Man 2, which some people still hold up as being one of the greatest superhero movies of all time. In that one, even though I'm not a huge fan of Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, I still feel like he looks way too old for the role.
He's a college Spider-Man.
Yeah, I just can't get past that. The kind of pathos and the weight of the struggle, it was more convincingly portrayed, I think, by Tobey Maguire. Like, you really, and the way Sam Raimi shoots it, you know, with stuff like Peter Parker tossing the Spider-Man suit in the trash at one point and trying to fully give up being Spider-Man entirely. Some of that kind of connects with you in a way that the similar type of struggle doesn't in Far From Home, because I don't think we ever fully really believe that Tom Holland's Spider-Man is going to really hang up the suit. In terms of like everything else around that struggle, for me it still comes off as like a very satisfying experience. The jokes really land. The performances are all really strong. The dynamic between Tom Holland and Zendaya as MJ, that's really good. That there's some chemistry there that really sells it. Whereas like you compare a similar relationship between Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Kirsten Dunst's MJ in the Raimi films, as good as Tobey Maguire is selling you on the struggle with Spider-Man, I didn't feel the chemistry between him and Dunst in the same way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I think Tom Holland's chemistry as Zendaya is even better than Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's. They were like a real life couple at the time. My major sticking point I kind of have is the villain. Again, I think Jake Gyllenhaal is like super fantastic. When he's angry and being charming, that's when he's at his best, because he's one of the few actors who can toe the line between like being like super friendly and then in an instant becoming like the worst, most terrifying serial killer you've ever seen. He has that switch. Michael Keaton kind of had it in that in Homecoming, but I felt that Michael Keaton's character as the Vulture had a much better backstory than Mysterio.
Oh yeah.
I think part of it is because the origins of Mysterio himself in the comics is kind of hilarious. In the comics, he's again a Hollywood special effects genius, and he's sort of jaded by the Hollywood reputation where all the actors and all the directors get all the praise, and he's kind of cast aside, and all he wants is more recognition and attention, which I think is something we all strive for, but maybe not to the extent where we all become like villains and like, you know, threaten to destroy the world.
Right.
But I'm curious, what did you think of Mysterio as someone who's maybe not as familiar with the comic book history?
Well, I'm glad they went with Mysterio, because I remember him from the cartoons in the 90s, and he's just he's an out there kind of character choice, and I'm glad they went with him as opposed to, you know, someone we've already seen on screen like Green Goblin or Venom.
Right.
So that was pretty cool, but I didn't feel the real kind of personal connection between Mysterio and Peter Parker in terms of like their rivalry, in the way that Peter Parker's character is more connected to Vulture in Homecoming, because and so like Mysterio's final goal, he wants it felt like it was actually kind of lifted from the first Incredibles movie, actually. Like there was a lot of connection between, Mysterio wants to be seen as a superhero on the par with the Avengers, and he wants to create a manufactured crisis that he alone can swoop in and save, and that's exactly what Syndrome does in the first Incredibles movie. Mysterio seems to believe that the Avengers are not really all they're cracked up to be, and that he can do the job better, and kind of bring some hope to the world in a twisted sort of way. Like that felt a little bit warmed over for me, and as much as I love Gyllenhaal's performance, it didn't seem like the kind of thing that really would test Peter Parker in a way that I wanted to see.
They sort of frame Jake Gyllenhaal as this like cool uncle / surrogate father to Peter Parker in Tony Stark's absence. The one thing too that I wanted to point out was that a lot of what goes on in Spider-Man's universe, just Spider-Man, so much of it is tinged with Iron Man and Tony Stark. It's like they can't escape him, and that ends up tinging some of Mysterio's character. We're obviously going into spoiler territory here.
Yeah, so watch out if you're...
Yeah, exactly. So the backstory is that Jake Gyllenhaal's character, Quentin Beck, is a disgruntled former employee of Tony Stark. I don't know how I feel about this development, because I feel like if this movie was about Spider-Man breaking free from Iron Man, then I think the villain themselves shouldn't have a connection to Iron Man as well. It should be something external that Spider-Man has to defeat with his own methods and whatnot, without any sort of interference from Tony Stark. So much of Mysterio's motivations and characterization is baked in to previous Iron Man movies, not even like the previous Spider-Man film.
Yeah, like we see one of Quentin Beck's employees or lackeys or whatever is actually, and kudos to Marvel for tracking down this like character actor to reprise his role, because I wouldn't have expected that. But we see a clip from the first Iron Man where one of the kind of dweeby scientists that Jeff Bridges' character menaces in one scene appears here again, like many movies later, in another role. And yeah, like you get this sense that like Tony Stark is throughout this movie and was throughout Homecoming as well, because Vulture's character was screwed over by Stark Industries in the prologue of that movie. Yeah, it's I see your point that it would have been nice to see a villain who wasn't quite as bound up in that.
Yeah, it's just tough to see Spider-Man as a standalone franchise or character when Tony Stark's presence is felt throughout so much of the film. And I wrote on my review too, like, you half expect another Avenger to show up.
Right.
And they kind of tease that a little bit, because Spider-Man at one point's like, hey, why don't you call all these other superheroes at your arsenal instead of me? I'm trying to go on vacation here. So it's a bit odd. It feels a little empty, I think, when no other Marvel superhero shows up. Even in the end credit scene, like, I was expecting someone else to show up.
Yeah, some bonus scene. We do get a pretty cool bonus scene, but it has nothing to do with the Avengers. So again, if you still haven't seen the movie yet, watch out.
Yeah.
But this was a moment that actually I went to see the movie with my brother, and he had been talking about this for probably months before this movie came out, hoping that J.K. Simmons would be reprising his role as J. Jonah Jameson in the bonus scene at the end of this movie. And what do you know? It actually happens. But that
was a surprise. That was a nice surprise.
Yeah, I didn't think they would do it. I mean, you do have to do a bit of mental gymnastics to sort of like figure out, well, I mean, if J.K. Simmons had played J. Jonah Jameson in the Maguire movies under Sam Raimi, and now he's playing the same character but in a different version of the universe. So it's a little bit, when you think about it too long, it starts to fall apart. But it's great to see him kind of reimagined for 2019 as not a newspaper guy, but an Alex Jones style conspiracy theorist, web video guy.
I think it's pretty much a given that he'll have a much bigger role in Spider-Man 3.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I hope for that film that we completely shed the Tony Starkness of the series so far completely. And I do think that a lot of the previous villains that we've seen, like Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, I don't think we'll see them in the third film. I think it'd be smart and prudent of Marvel to go in a different direction.
Yeah, well, John Watts, the director of these past two ones, has already said that if it were up to him, he would go with the Spider-Man villain Kraven the Hunter.
Mm-hmm. That was supposed to be one of the villains in this one, but he ended up getting scrapped, actually.
Yeah, but Kraven, to me, has never really seemed like a kind of like A-list villain. He's always seemed to me to be more of like a B-list villain because his whole idea is like he wants to hunt Spider-Man the way he hunts big game. And like the potential for like the scope of the movie seems a bit limited if Kraven's the only one in the picture.
Well, I mean, if you think about Spider-Man villains, a lot of their goals are kind of like nebulous. I'm not exactly sure what Shocker or Rhino or some of the other villains really have in common as sort of like an ultimate goal.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot of them are just there to torment Spider-Man. I don't know how Kraven would work in a big screen adaptation, although he is one of the original Sinister Six villains, and I think Marvel is going to build towards that. I just don't know how, considering how we got Scorpion and Vulture in the first Spider-Man, and then now we got Mysterio, and who knows, Mysterio could be back. The character, not Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh yeah, because I'm sure they could find another way to kind of come at that. But
exactly.
You know who I'd love to see? I would love Vincent D'Onofrio to reprise his role as Kingpin.
Yes, he's a very good. Well, haven't they talked about sort of bringing Tom Hardy's Venom into this series as well?
Yeah, it's been tossed around, and I mean, Sony still has the rights to that character, obviously, and they're they're busy. I'm pretty sure the first Venom with Tom Hardy made enough money that a sequel is in the works. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
The other funny kind of business side of this conversation also has to do with apparently the contract that Sony and Disney signed back in 2015 to share the character in the way that they're currently doing stipulated that if Far From Home doesn't make $1 billion worldwide box office gross, then Sony gets back full control of the character.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a bit of like kind of like some stakes to the watching the box office for this movie now, because I mean so far a lot of analysts predict that it will cross the $1 billion mark, and Marvel will still share control into the next movie. But it's kind of a weird situation where Sony almost needs the movie to underperform if they really want to get control back. It's a strange thing.
Interesting. I know Homecoming fell short of $1 billion. So I think this one will do roughly the same. I think Homecoming, let me just look this up real quick. Yeah, so Spider-Man Homecoming grossed $880 million.
Okay, yeah.
I think this will come close. I think cracking $1 billion is pretty difficult, but already like the foreign gross for this movie is more than halfway to Homecoming's $545 million gross worldwide. Domestically, it was like unbelievable, $334 million. Far From Home, as it stands as of right now, July 9th, is at $195, and sort of box office performance tends to die off really quickly after the first couple weeks. It's not uncommon to see like 50% drops in gross week over week. So I think that's an interesting notion. I'm not confident it'll gross $1 billion. It's slightly less than 600 right now worldwide. So it needs a lot of legs to get there.
Yeah, and I mean this report about the deal that Disney and Sony signed. I mean, this is just based on like one source who is close to the production. So maybe it's been improperly reported or exaggerated in some way, because a lot of people like to talk about the contracts that get signed in these cases, and it's not always correct. But it would be an interesting kind of development if Sony decided to break it off because of the money not being what it should be. But
Sony's got to realize that it's only doing so well because of Marvel.
Oh yeah, because apparently when they, the last one that they produced on their own, which was The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the second Andrew Garfield one, that one apparently made them like only a couple tens of millions of dollars in profit. It was like even though the overall numbers were huge, the way they had financed it was so backwards that they came away from it with way less money than they should have.
That's funny.
Yeah, and that came out of the Sony hack. That was that was a one of the revelations there. So
right.
Yeah, it's really in Sony's best interest to kind of continue partnering with Marvel on this, I would say.
So overall, I think it's a pretty good film. It's clearly doesn't have the same stakes as Avengers. It's catered towards a bit of a younger demographic, but I think for the most part, it's dramatic and funny enough that all audiences can enjoy. And I think that's kind of the broader appeal of Spider-Man, is that I feel like there is a little something for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, he's your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. You know, he's supposed to be kind of like that, sweet, good-natured guy who just wants to make Queens a better place.
Slightly annoying, though, don't you find? Slightly annoying.
Yeah, a bit of a smart aleck, yeah.
Not even a smart aleck, but just whiny. Just a bit of a bitch sometimes. Like, Tom Holland, like, bless your heart. But Peter Parker, I feel like, has gone through enough, like, moments of self-doubt, moments of tears, moments of loss, moments of uncertainty. And I'm just like, dude, just put on your tights and go kick some butt. So the unfortunate part is that this is always going to be compared to Into the Spider-Verse because of how closely they were released with one another and how similar a lot of the themes are. And Into the Spider-Verse is just, to this day, like, I still think it's probably one of the most amazing animated films I've ever seen.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. It's up there with like the very best Spider-Man movies. So
yeah, superhero movies in general, or however broad you want to take it, I think it's really up there. But you saw something else of a more mature variety, which a film that I like. I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever gonna be able to bring myself to see it.
Okay, well, here's the thing. So we're talking about this movie, Midsommar. So it's like the word midsummer, but with an AR at the end, kind of like the old English spelling, I think. Mm-hmm. But this is a movie from the director Ari Aster, who previously made his debut feature a couple of years ago was called Hereditary, which met with a pretty strong response from critics. Like, people were kind of in agreement that it was like he was a sort of a bold new voice on the scene when it came to horror. And I'm by no means a horror guy. I try to make an exception where I see like a handful, maybe 2 or 3 of the really top level, like, best horror of the year, just to kind of know roughly what I'm talking about in the genre. And so here comes Ari Aster with his sophomore film. The way it's presented in the trailers makes you think that we're going to be getting like a classic horror movie gore fest, except it's set in broad daylight in Sweden at the height of midsummer, or the midsummer solstice.
I invited Danny to come to Sweden.
You know what she's been going through.
Christian says you've got this special week planned.
It's sort of a crazy festival. Special ceremonies and dressing up.
That sounds fun.
Unbelievable.
Welcome and happy midsummer.
But what we get in the movie is actually not nearly as gory as I expected. There's probably only like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 gory scenes in it, and nothing like egregious. I mean, I compare it to another horror movie that I saw last fall, Suspiria, the remake of the Dario Argento movie. That had an ending that was 10 times as gory as anything in Midsommar. So if you're seeing like marketing for this movie and you're wondering like what the scare factor is, it's actually not that high. If you can stomach these handful of scenes, or shots rather.
I was just gonna say, Rob, that's a lie.
Why are you looking up the Wikipedia to try to get a sense of what happens in it?
No, I haven't looked at the Wikipedia yet. That's how afraid I am.
Okay,
I'm gonna read something on Wikipedia and just gonna give me nightmares. So
okay, so I will literally tell you, without revealing who this happens to, I will tell you that there are 2 characters who get their heads kind of bashed in with a thing.
Okay.
But like that, you just see like the heads kind of come apart. Like there's no like really bad stuff there. So you see that in a couple of shots. And then there's another shot where you kind of see this guy who's like hung upside down inside like a hut, and he's had his like lungs taken out of him.
Like when he's alive?
It's hard to tell whether he's alive and still breathing or whether it's like a drug trip. but like it looks more like a medical procedure than anything else. So I can't really call it like, it's definitely not fun to look at, but it's also pretty brief. But in terms of like gore and violence, that's pretty much it. Oh, and there's one guy who like wears another person's face, but that's a very brief scene. You think about the kind of violence in a John Wick movie, for example, like John Wick is like kills like 200 people in John Wick Chapter 3, and stabbing and shooting and everything. And granted, you don't see quite as much because they're kind of quick action cuts and stuff, but that arguably has more violence than this movie. But to kind of give context to this whole discussion, the movie kicks off with a young woman played by Florence Pugh, who she's living, I think, in like some Midwestern state, and there's this family tragedy that happens to her. Her sister and her parents are all killed. Prior to this, her relationship with her boyfriend was very much on the rocks, and it was pretty clear that they were going to break up. But the boyfriend, played by Jack Rayner, decides in the wake of this family tragedy that he has to kind of stick with her. He has to support her. But you can tell that their relationship is still pretty rough. And meanwhile, Jack Rayner's character, the boyfriend, he's been planning to go to this festival in Sweden with some friends of his from university. And it's going to be this kind of trip to a weird hippie commune way up in the rural part of Sweden, away from technology. And they're going to observe this cultural festival with all these kind of pagan rituals celebrating the midsummer solstice. So they decide to invite Florence Pugh's character, the girlfriend, with them, even though the friends really don't want to. They arrive in Sweden, but then over the period of a couple of days, they swiftly discover that there's like basically a pagan cult on the go in this community, with this kind of addiction to wild rituals, and certainly a bit of violence, and kind of strange drug-fueled trips and dancing and weird stuff like that. The movie has a lot of DNA in common with The Wicker Man, the movie from the 70s with Christopher Lee, which of course was remade to the internet's delight with Nicolas Cage about 10 years ago. That's the movie where the "not the bees" scene comes from. So if you're into movies with with a bit of like a folk horror kind of vibe to them, another example might be Robert Eggers' The Witch. The movie doesn't have a lot of scares or jump moments.
And from what I understand, unlike a lot of horror films, it's like a lot of the plot and a lot of the characters are shown in broad daylight.
Yes. Yeah. So you don't have that aspect of not being able to see what's going on. And in some ways you may get enough of a thrill just because you can kind of see things coming from a long distance away. And maybe that might give you a bit of a spook because it's different from the kind of jump scare tactic that is so common in almost all horror films.
Was it one of those films that kind of like defies genre?
Yeah, it's definitely it's on the fence between a couple of genres. I mean, because there's so few jump scares, at times it really doesn't feel like a horror. It feels more like a psychological thriller where we're almost seeing, and I'm referencing Mark Kermode here because he described it so well in his review from a few days ago. Basically, you're in the rituals and the experience that's happening on this in this commune, you're kind of seeing like the external version of the mental struggle, the emotional struggle that Florence Pugh's character is experiencing, where she's trying to deal with the deaths of her family and also her relationship with her boyfriend. And so we're kind of seeing like all of that turmoil, but kind of exaggerated and put out into the world, which is a little bit of it might sound a bit pretentious to put it in those terms, but I think that's a really good way of thinking about this movie. So this might sound like super horrific and not everyone's cup of tea, but the one thing I'll leave you with is that this is a really funny movie. There's a lot of like jokes in it.
Yeah, right. You're just saying that so you want me to go see it.
No. There's like there's a scene where like basically the hippies or the Swedish cult members, they're also obsessed with extending their gene pool. So they separate Florence Pugh from her character from her boyfriend, and they take her off for one ritual, and then they take him into another building, and they want him to quote unquote mate with one of their women so that, their gene pool doesn't get super tiny and, birth defects and all that. So they have this kind of orgy scene where like there's a bunch of these naked women kind of standing around him, and he's expected to kind of have sex with this girl on the floor, and they're all chanting around him. But Jack Rayner's face while this is happening, he's so like confused and weirded out by the whole thing that it's clear that they're making a joke of it. Like, you're supposed to laugh. So even though the implication of what's happening is creepy and weird, we're still laughing. It's a bizarre kind of clash of emotions, and it's kind of hilarious, and I love it. Will Poulter is also in it, and he's kind of like the comic relief. And all kinds of, he's always cracking wise and kind of pointing out the hypocrisies in this community. And he's also really fun.
I noticed that this is basically Ari Aster's second big film. The first one being Hereditary. He doesn't have anything lined up after this. Now I'm wondering, like, is he a guy who's just going to stay in this sort of genre forever, or is he gonna sort of branch out into something a little bigger, or maybe branch out into something that's more traditional, like drama or action or anything like that?
I could probably see him going in a couple of directions. I mean, he in this movie proves that he can navigate between genres pretty smoothly. Like there's such a blend of stuff on the go here that I could see him doing drama, I could see him doing action. He said that writing this movie was actually inspired by a breakup that he was going through.
Okay.
And so, and he's also talked about how like some of his best writing happens when he's in some sort of crisis mode. So maybe if like he gets the right inspiration, hopefully it doesn't like, damage him too badly, but who knows what he could turn his hand to next. I'm really curious to see what it is. 'Cause I mean, I know that, horror is definitely not your thing, but I still think you might get a kick out of this because it's just so weird and so like it's great to see original scripts like this getting made. And A24 is responsible for this. They're the production house behind it, the distributor. So I just think it's cool to see kind of original concepts like this making its way to the screen and getting like a theatrical release. Also in sort of a horror vein, we're going to change over to the small screen now with Stranger Things 3.
Yes.
What if he never left? What if we locked him out here with us? He'd want to attach himself to someone again. A new host.
And you told me that you binged this movie, or I called it a movie, but it's like an 8-hour movie.
Yeah.
I said that in the intro.
Yeah, I binged it.
You binged it in like one day, you said?
One sitting.
Wow.
Yes, I was so burnt out by the end.
Yeah, that's a lot.
My buddy and I don't know, we've like started this like unofficial tradition of basically binging the entire series in one sitting. But by episode 5 and 6, I was kind of ready to throw in the white flag. I was like, I'm burnt out, I can't concentrate. But we were both like, well, there's only 2 episodes left, we might as well keep going.
Yeah.
So we did that. And I gotta say, like, season 2, I felt like I needed a break sometimes. Season 3 was very seamless episode to episode, and it really felt like one long 8-hour movie. And for the most part, I really enjoyed all of it. I think it's stronger than season 2, even just based on the odd Chicago episode in season 2. That totally threw me for a loop. I haven't rewatched season 1, but I would say season 3 and season 1 are more similar. I enjoyed all the new characters that came in season 3, especially Robin, who's played by Maya Hawke, the daughter of Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman. And a bigger role for Sadie Sink, who plays Max.
Yeah, and well, before we go too far, just know that I haven't seen the final 2 episodes of this season.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. All right, I won't spoil it.
Yeah, but we can talk all the way up through till the end of episode 6, I'd say. Answer me this, though. Based on what I've seen up until the end of episode 6, like, there's quite a bit of gore in this one compared to previous seasons, I'd say. Like,
you think so?
Yeah, I would argue that the amount of gore and, like, the stuff that happens to the characters, based on what I've seen so far, is way worse than Midsommar.
Really?
Yeah. Because, spoilers, obviously, for anyone who hasn't reached the same point that either of us have, But basically, towards the end of the 6th episode, you've got innocent townspeople and Hawkins getting liquefied into like, self-propelling blobs of like flesh and blood and bones, and then like forming into this giant monster. Like that's like, you think about the monsters from season 2 or even season 1, where they were like, creatures or monsters with like flesh and skin and bone, and they look kind of gross and they had weird body parts, but we weren't seeing like people turn into goo the way we do here.
I didn't find it that gory. I don't find people turning into goo that gory.
Was it the fantasy element of it that kind of made it easier to take?
I think part of it is a fantasy element. Part of it is because I think one of the biggest influences for Stranger Things is campy horror and campy thriller. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like the mindset coming in. I actually thought season 2 was probably more scary and gorier.
More because of like the ending with Sean Astin?
Yeah, I think there's less body part maiming in season 3. Just as much gross stuff involving like the upside down and like references to child abuse and whatnot. I didn't find it gory. Like at no part did I ever really feel uncomfortable watching it. The only time I maybe felt uncomfortable watching was when all the rats started like moving and exploding. But that's just because I don't like those furry little creatures in general.
Yeah, you had furry little creatures that were not only like being gross on their own, but then they were turning into goo blobs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was a natural progression for a lot of these characters too. The only one that I still hate is Mike. I think he's a little bitch. I think David Harbour took like a hard turn into comedy.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been comedy in his performance, but yeah, he seems to be playing up certain parts of his character.
Yeah, so in this season, he's definitely more of a foil rather than the hero.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Not so much like he's just as heroic, but he's no longer the protector of the kids. These kids have all grown up and have learned how to handle themselves, which I really appreciate. I appreciate the fact that they handled all the problems in the season alone and how they separated and converge again. And I actually thought the 2 stars of the season were Joe Keery and Gaten Matazzaro.
Oh, yeah.
Dustin and Steve. And their sort of bromance, I don't even know if it's a bromance because there's such a disparity in age, but their bromance is as awesome as you could be. It is by far, I think, the most interesting character relationship. Everyone's kind of falls into a sort of a trope.
Yes, and a lot of the relationships kind of stay roughly where they've been or evolve from where they've been in the previous seasons. But yeah, when Steve meets up with Dusty again after Dusty's been away at camp, they kind of greet each other, and you're like, yeah, you kind of you get a thrill from that in a way that you may not from some of the other character pairings. But I 100% agree with you. Maya Hawke is a great new find. I feel like she's going to go far. I definitely agree that structurally, this whole season is very much more plot driven than thematically driven. I feel like the last one, we had that kind of singular episode where Elle goes off to kind of find out about her backstory that some people hated and other people were okay with. You had more of the characters kind of intersecting with each other over the course of the season, but this one kind of keeps the characters off in their own camps or factions for longer stretches of time, and the scripts are just kind of propelling the story forward in this very kind of linear way.
It's also again, they do such a great job with the nostalgia of people hanging out at shopping malls, which is a real thing back in the day.
Yeah.
Maybe not chasing girls, but just relationships and how they play out with the absentee dad with the Mr. Wheeler, the mom that's kind of in a midlife crisis with Mrs. Wheeler.
Yeah, the sexual tension there.
Yeah, the sexual tension there. And then how everyone hangs out at the pool and the mall. And those are the 2 central sort of settings for all the townspeople. And I think kind of everything revolves around those 2 places.
Yeah, and they're starting the main kids, the 4 boys that were introduced to at the beginning. They're starting to put down some of their their interest in like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. Yeah. So that, you know, if you've gone through a similar arc in your own childhood, that feels very familiar.
Yeah, like poor Will Byers. He just wants to play D&D, man.
Yeah.
So that's why Mike's a little bitch. Like, stop making out and just like be a good friend for once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, stop thinking about your own penis and your own, you know, urges, and just be a nice kid to a friend who like has obviously been through so much trauma. Like you can't spare 2 hours and play D&D with this kid.
Yeah, after he almost died like 15 times in the past 2 seasons.
I know. What a dick, honestly.
But I mean, that does kind of like, that informs his character quite a bit. Like, I'm sure there's been plenty of people who have seen their friends get similarly like girl obsessed over the years, or boy obsessed, whatever the case may be.
The music was really good too in this season too.
Yeah, the 80s and 90s are definitely in full nostalgia kick, just in general, like in pop culture these days. So that's happening at the right time. Like I said, I'm not all the way through it yet, but there's plenty of other references to, like, I was digging the Terminator 2 references with the Russian assassin guy.
That's what my buddy and I called him too. It's like, wow, the Terminator guy.
Yeah, except he's like the Terminator in denim.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, there's the new Coke thing. There's Baskin Robbins references.
Also, I can't remember the actress's name, but the girl who plays Erica, she's it's cool to see them build on her character a little bit. I mean,
Priya Ferguson.
Yeah, Priya Ferguson. She's the kind of character who, when she's introduced in the earlier seasons, you kind of just sort of see her as the younger sister of one of the 4 leads. But in this one, they really build up her character. They make her seem like basically a child genius who can't really admit that she's secretly a nerd. And they give her a handful of great scenes with Dusty that just kind of like build out the world of the show a little bit, and probably set up possibilities for future character development in, you know, Stranger Things 4 if they get to that point.
You haven't got to the last 2 episodes, so I'll try not to spoil anything, but I do think having sort of one major alien is better than having like 10,000 demodogs or whatever it is. I think it helps centralize the conflict and helps really keep your focus. Just on a last note, there are 2 more characters that really bugged me other than Mike. And like, this is not like a knock against the show. They're always characters that you will like or won't like for various reasons. But the other one I didn't like was Jonathan Byers, so Will's brother. Like, he does nothing. Like, Nancy really makes him go in this season. And I think Nancy, for a large part, redeems herself. Partly because she has to deal with a bunch of jackasses, and she more than holds her own in my opinion. The other one is you haven't seen her yet, but Susie, Dustin's girlfriend.
Oh yeah, they keep referencing her in the early episodes. Yeah.
So they keep referencing her, and you know she's there, and you know she's gonna turn up at some point.
Oh yeah.
I really didn't like her character.
Oh,
that's
okay.
all I can say. I don't want to spoil it, but I just really didn't like her character. I feel like Dustin is way too good for her.
Well, like one of the themes in this season is definitely like, you know, we're seeing the first loves of some of these characters. So I feel like there's plenty of potential for them to kind of learn something from these early relationships, and then maybe find their soulmates in a future season. So, okay, so do you know what my wish list would be for Stranger Things 4?
What?
Without having seen the conclusion yet of the current season. It's a wish list of one thing. Keanu Reeves. It's the year of Keanu right now. I feel like they could announce that they've signed Keanu Reeves for the next season, even if it doesn't come out for more than a year, and everyone will love it. It'll be like, if not the 4th, maybe the 5th or the 6th on-screen partnership between Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. So it makes perfect sense. You know, they have a great professional relationship. They work really well together. Have Keanu Reeves in it. I don't care who he plays. He could even play one of the monsters, but that's what I want.
He really looks like he could be from that era too, eh?
Exactly. He's the perfect man for this time in our culture when the 80s and 90s are roaring back. And we need a man who is not only looks like he fits in that generation, but is also just a super nice dude.
But in case he doesn't, he is filming Bill and Ted 3. So
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that'll be a sort of a nice consolation prize if he doesn't come back for.
This is true. Yeah. Well, we should go back and rewatch the first 2 Bill and Ted's before the new one comes out, and kind of do like a series review or something. We'll have to plan for that.
The second one wasn't that good though. The one with like the robot girls. Do you remember that one?
I don't even remember. I'm pretty sure I saw it, but I can't remember.
Oh, okay. Well, the first one's easy. The one's like their history project and the travel through time, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That one's still the best. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And then the second one, like as with a lot of sequels, it didn't live up to the original. I'm a little skeptical of the third film that they're filming right now, actually. But I agree with you. Keanu's on a second peak in Hollywood. He's got like a second life in Hollywood now.
Yeah, it feels like I feel like I've seen like 4 projects with him just in the past year, and he's got even more coming out.
And they're not all films, which is great.
Yeah, he's doing video games now, and all kinds of cool stuff. But yeah, I think that about does it for this episode. Head on over to kinetoscope.ca where you can read Jason's review of Spider-Man: Far From Home. And of course, we have more summer coverage in the works. We'll be looking at the Lion King remake, most likely, and Quentin Tarantino's 9th film, or maybe 10th film, depending on how you count it. That's coming up in a couple weeks' time, so we'll be getting into that. But until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check our website, follow us on Twitter, and we'll talk to you next time.